What are the most common mistakes people are making on their GA4 setups in 2025? That is the question I'm aiming to answer with my fantastic returning guest, Dana DiTomaso.
Rarely have seen like a great GA4. And I think a lot of the setups out there are just mediocre and they're not really unlocking everything you can do in GA4. Hey, so your great traffic gains, no, it's just they put the code on twice. Because sometimes I'll see it in Tag Manager and then directly on the site. And so it's just, you end up with these messes. So it's too many cooks is also a really common issue where it's like people are making changes and not talking to each other. And, and then you end up with chaos. I just audited a website where 25% of their revenue is coming from a development URL in their live GA4. So they don't have any traffic shaping on their Google Tag Manager to send stuff off to different GA4s based on the host name. And my philosophy has always been, I don't really care if people get on the website as long as they go and buy your stuff.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, as always, Jack Chambers Ward, and this is the podcast where I interview the best and brightest minds in all of SEO every single week. Every single Monday morning, I deliver an interview or a conversation or a panel about cool and interesting things happening in the digital marketing world. As you probably noticed, I am not in the Candour studio right now. It is 27 degrees here in the UK right now, and I can't live in the studio in that kind of heat. We call it the kiln when it gets in the summer and the fridge when it gets in the winter. There is no ventilation in the studio. I am at home. This is my home studio, essentially. And like I said at the top of the show, I am joined this week by a returning guest, one of my favorite people to talk anything, but also analytics. Dana DiTomaso from Kickpoint Playbook is returning to talk all about basically GA4 horror stories and the kind of things Dana sees when she's auditing other people's and her clients' GA4 setups. We're going to talk about the most common mistakes Dana sees, the biggest and worst horror stories she's seen in the last few years since the proper integration and launch of GA4, and plenty of other stuff as well, don't you worry. Of course, before I get to my conversation with Dana, please do hit the like button down below and subscribe if you haven't already on YouTube. You can also follow and leave a comment on Spotify. We got our 2 or 3 comments, I think, a couple of weeks ago. It was very, very nice to hear from people complimenting, in particular, the AI mode future of search panel I did a couple of weeks ago, which I think was one of the best episodes we've ever done, which I'm really, really glad you guys enjoyed so much. And I'll have some amazing guests and more panel type discussions coming up in the future as well. 2 little announcements before I get to my conversation with Dana in a moment. One of them, I'm speaking at Brighton SEO in October, which is still surreal and feels weird to me. And I'm very, very excited. It's my first time professionally speaking in person. I've done a lot of stuff online. Obviously, I host this podcast and I've done a few webinars and things like that. It's going to be my first time in front of a crowd at the biggest SEO conference in the UK. And I'm excited. I'm nervous. And yeah, huge thank you to the Brighton SEO team for saying, yeah, we want to hear your talk. I did a pitch. I felt pretty okay about it. And I got in. So yeah, if you're going to be in Brighton in October in 2025, not only, of course, will I be doing the live podcast with Sarah and Tasman, I'll also be speaking on stage at some point. Don't know what stage, don't know what time yet. I will let you know closer to the time once I know and that's all confirmed. And the second thing is, in November, following my talk in Brighton, I'm fighting in an MMA fight for charity. It sounds like I'm making this up. I promise I'm not making this up. Totally real thing that I intend to do. Basically, we have a charity partner each year here at Candour, and our charity partner this year is a local mental health organization called Norfolk Clubhouse. Basically, I want to get in shape. I want to better myself. I want to get healthier. I used to train a lot of martial arts when I was younger, but I've gotten complacent, shall we say, in my podcasting and marketing career. So I want to get back out there, away from the desk, get a bit of exercise, get fit. And yeah, I'm going to have an actual somewhat proper mixed martial arts fight in November, right here in Norwich. And yeah, I'll put the link. You can support me there. I've got a funding goal of £1,000 at the moment. I think I'm on about £750, which is amazing. Very, very cool. We hit 500 in the first 48 hours, which blew my mind. But yes, I'll put my Just Giving page and link that in the show notes down below. And I'll put a link for buying tickets for Brighton SEO as well. Of course, no further ado. I have been talking for far too long already. I apologize. Please do enjoy my conversation with the wonderful Dana DiTomaso. My guest this week has over 20 years of experience in digital marketing. They have spoken at conferences around the world and are a former Speaker of the Year from Search Engine Land. They are one of the best sources around for GA4 knowledge and GA4 education. They are the founder and president at Kickpoint Playbook and are making their triumphant return to the show after 13 months away. Welcome back to Search with Candour, Dana DiTomaso.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for reaching out again. It's always a pleasure to podcast with you. I think I had a lot of fun last time talking about, it sounds like a counterintuitive thing. We had a lot of fun talking about attribution and key events. And
I mean, as much fun as one could have under the circumstances.
Exactly, right? Yeah. We made it as fun as we could.
Yes, exactly. And now we're back again to talk about GA4 dumpster fires.
Exactly. I think we coined the term, this is Dana's annual GA4 dumpster fire report. That is the official title.
Because I will have lots of stories every single. I mean, we could do this monthly with the amount of stuff that I see.
Oh, now
accounts,
we're talking, mate. Now we're talking.
Oh,
regular feature. And you've just launched a brand new GA4 audit course on Kickpoint Playbook as well. And I think we'll get into some auditing discussion as well. Because
absolutely.
I'm sure you've seen some messy setups and chaotic things in your time.
No one contacts me because their GA4 is great and they just want someone else to come in and take a look, right? Like for once, actually, if you're listening and you have a fantastic GA4 setup, please contact me and show it to me because I would like to see one that's done well.
It's just therapy for you at this point, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, like just, look at the nice, pleasant picture. Can be your happy place. Yeah, it's I mean, not every GA4 setup I see is a complete dumpster fire. Some of them are just like things aren't great, but they're not complete chaos. And some that I see are exactly like that gift from Community where he walks in with the pizza and there's like things on fire. And sometimes that's the GA4. So, yeah.
I think that has definitely been my experience, like talking to clients. And when we went through our setup process with our clients, God, it was July of last year, wasn't it? God, that seems like not that long ago and very long ago.
It was
at the
July
same time.
2 years ago now.
There you go. See, I'm even wrong then. Thank you for correcting me. I couldn't even tell. Time is a flat circle post-pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And I've definitely seen some instances where, we've had that conversation with the client of, do you want us to help set it up? We have our analytics team here. We can go through that process with you guys. Or are you already on it? Have you already done it? Like, what's the plan here? And it has been a very interesting mix. So I can only imagine from my very, very limited experience here at Candour, the kind of things you have seen, Dana, over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so, and I also think that people come to me because they're like, it's really broken. It's not just like moderately broken. The times I see you are moderately broken because my agency, Kickpoint, we do websites, we do SEO, we do PPC. Not everyone comes to us first because of analytics issues. So if someone comes to us first because they need a new website, usually their GA4 is like fine, but not great, and I rarely have seen like a great GA4. And I think a lot of the setups out there are just kind of mediocre and they're not really unlocking everything you can do in GA4 because I think a lot of people kind of set it up and gave up on it and now they're like, oh, I have to get actual data out of it. Crap. So I feel like that's the next phase that we're in GA4. Everyone did the initial setup. They've kind of forgot about it for a while. Now they have to pull a report and they're like, oh, this is gross. I don't want to use this. So that's the kind of people I'm dealing with now.
That was kind of thing we were talking about last time. I think there's, you just mentioned before we started recording as well, like there's been an updated UI change. There's like constant little changes and little things. We mentioned obviously the conversions going to key events as well last year, like all those little shifts that if you're not keeping on top of it and you're not paying attention to conversations like this, content created by people like yourself, then you can't really do that set it and forget it thing anymore. Because I think, I don't know, again, we were talking about this before we started recording, like you can get into that comfortable like zone of, oh yeah, I kind of know what I'm doing. It'll be fine. And then you come back 6 months later, 9 months later, whatever it is, and actually have a proper look instead of just a 10-minute poke around or whatever it is and realize, oh no, that's not pulling through. Why isn't Tag Manager doing that? And then how is that? But that isn't.
Or if you're even using Tag Manager, which some people still don't. So yeah.
So I guess we'll start off with like, what are some of the most common issues you've seen in your trials and trails across the last couple of years that you've seen in GA4 setups?
I would say one of the big ones, and this is something that I think is, a communication sort of, not failure on behalf of Google, I guess we could call it that, but more, they made a change people didn't know. So when GA4 very first came out and people were putting it in Tag Manager, normally you would run it on like all pages view, for example, that setup configuration tag. And now GTM has a new tag called container initialization, which is when the Google tag, the GA4 tag, should actually run. But people haven't updated their GA4s. And so what you end up with is you might see this scary red warning in GA4 that says like, your tag sequencing is incorrect or blah, blah, blah. You have more not set than you should. And that's probably because you just need to run your GA4 main tag on container initialization, not all pages view. And the reason for that is because that session start event, that first visit event, has to be the very first thing that's recorded because it sets the attribution and everything else for everything else that's recorded during that session. Because as much as they were like, no, GA4 isn't sessionized, it's sessionized. And part of it is setting that session start event first. And so if all pages is just everything that's attached to all pages will run all at the same time. And whichever one gets there first wins. And sometimes it might be the GA4 tag and sometimes it might be something else. So it is really important. Just go into your Google Tag Manager, check which trigger your GA4 tag is attached to. If it's all pages, change it to container initialization. Just go and check that. And that's, again, like a change they introduced later, but they didn't necessarily tell everybody that. And the documentation from Google is unfortunately kind of confusing and not very complete. So, yeah.
I think that, like I said, I think it's those little changes that often catch you out, right? And I think
totally.
when it, like you said, when it comes to the documentation side of things, I think because, and this is something I've kind of discussed throughout this year, it feels like having that broader knowledge across the different disciplines and different sides of the digital marketing industry, being aware of what's happening in PPC on your site and your client, even if you're only really working on the SEO side of things, is still hugely relevant, and can, especially when it comes to analytics, right? There is going to be so much potential crossover and crossed wires and all that kind of stuff. I've seen that, again, in my very limited experience, I've seen that plenty of times where you get one tag firing for one thing. It's like, but you set up another one, right? It's like, are you double tracking that? Do you know you're double tracking? Do you mean to be? How are you? Is that the same landing page for paid as it is for organic? Like, how are you differentiating the two? It's like, oh, don't worry about it. I'm like, no, I feel like we should probably worry about this.
We should probably worry about that. Yeah. And actually, too, there's another feature which reminded me of in GA4. So if you go into the admin, and I'm going to say this off by heart, so hopefully go into the admin, click on data streams, click on your web data stream, click on configure tag settings, click on admin up at the top. Then you'll see this option come up, and there's a slider that says ignore duplicate configuration instances. So if that is turned on and you have GA4 twice on the page, whatever is the first hit, the first detail that comes in makes it. If you have it shut off and you have GA4 twice on your site, then you're sending two pieces of data off to GA4. And if you have an older GA4, it might be shut off because, again, this was a setting that was introduced later and they didn't turn it on automatically for existing GA4 accounts when they introduced this feature. So if you're working with a much older GA4, it's one of the very first things I check when I do a GA4 audit is to be like, am I dealing with duplicate traffic potentially? Because that's also a very sad conversation when you have to be like, hey, so your great traffic gains, no, it's just they put the code on twice. Because sometimes I'll see it in Tag Manager and then directly on the site. And again, if that slider isn't turned on, it's recording it twice. So one time, this was a UA issue, but it was recording 4 times. And then when we switched them to GA4, they're like, our traffic went down so much. Like, yeah, because it's accurate now. That was a sad conversation to have. So that's probably one of the worst implementations I saw, but it wasn't really a GA4 issue. It was a UA issue.
I've definitely seen a similar kind of thing. Like you said, when you get a direct on site versus a tag manager, I think it was 3 instances is my record. So you've got me beat. But one was a WordPress plugin and a direct site and a tag manager all like battling against each other.
That's so common because it's like the web developer does it and then the marketing person doesn't really know the web developer's done it and they do it in tag manager and then like an analytics person's like, oh no, you have to have it directly on the site or something like that. And so it's just, you end up with these messes. So it's too many cooks is also a really common, issue where it's like people are making changes and not talking to each other and, and then you end up with chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think again, that's that similar conversation we had last time, I think, is like when you have that too many cooks involved and you need to understand who's attributing what to where and how are you tracking all of this stuff. And like we were saying just now, like, should that also be a key event for the paid side of things or the organic side of things? And who is caring about this particular metric or this particular KPI, then you can end up, like you said, double track. I had an instance like just saying there, you have to have that difficult conversation. I'm like, so the external paid team, they don't know that they're triple tracking, right? It's like, okay, we have to have a conversation with them and with the client, and they'll be like, so it turns out it's not 300,000, it's 100,000, and that's down year on year because you were tracking too much. It's an unpleasant but necessary conversation.
I just audited a website where 25% of their revenue is coming from a development URL in their live GA4. So they don't have any traffic shaping on their Google Tag Manager to send stuff off to different GA4s based on the host name. So their developers are testing purchases, as they should, but it's all coming into their main live GA4, and they're like, yeah, the revenue doesn't match up. Like, yep. That's correct. This is why. So it's stuff like that too that I run into a lot, where developers, again, I don't expect a developer to know that that's, it's not necessarily on them to realize that they're polluting the main the production GA4. But if they've never had someone come in Google Tag Manager, and you can put in a lookup variable, which would send data to different GA4s based on the host name. And that's the most common situation that I have. Sometimes I also do what I call a nested lookup. I don't know what the term is for it. I just use them all the time, where you have one lookup that says, if it's this host name, then check the second lookup table. If it's not the main host name, then send it off to the test staging GA4. And then the second lookup table says, what is the container version? If the container version is quick preview, which means you're in preview mode in Tag Manager, then send it off to the test staging property. Otherwise, you can go to the production property. And so by having these sort of nested lookups, you can look up across many different variables. And I've even done things like, what IP address are they coming from? Like, what's the, and so you can do lots of different things to send traffic to different locations, but it is, it does require some advanced knowledge of DTM variables for sure, which I don't expect everyone, in-house at a company to know. And this is where, like, reaching out to someone being like, is this possible? Most things are possible with enough time and money. It's just, it's just a matter of, like, realizing that you don't have to put up with, like, this issue. And in UA, we could have set up a view where we would say, if the host name isn't this, then don't include this traffic. But of course, in GA4, we don't have views, so we have to instead do the traffic filtering outside of GA4 itself. And of course, you could also filter the traffic by changing your reports in GA4 to say, only have this host name data show up in this report. But that's such a pain in the butt to have to add a filter to every single one of your reports. It's much easier to clean up the traffic before it makes it into GA4 and then send that traffic off somewhere else if it doesn't meet that criteria.
Yeah, definitely. The exact same client, I had a similar situation as well. It was links that had been left, staging links that had been left on the homepage.
Oh, yeah.
So in the main nav, there was like, we had 3 new product categories, 3 new ranges had launched, and they had just literally copied and pasted over the main nav. Because, again, not to get into a whole thing, but they literally copied and pasted the URLs from the staging, like the WordPress. I can't remember the name of the navigation builder they were using, but they're literally copied and pasted. It was not a connect the relative URLs. It was paste the absolute URLs into the thing. And I'm like, okay, that's great. That's handy. And then 3 or 4 purchases came through using staging URLs. And we got the alert on our end of things because we were connected to their WooCommerce setup. And I was like, that URL looks weird. And then frantically got a phone call from the client being like, oh my God, people are buying stuff on staging. What's happening? Freaking out. And I'm like, it's not the end of the world, but we need to fix it like now before it becomes the end of the world.
I mean, I often say, like, there's no actual marketing emergencies. Like, we're not saving babies here, but something like that's more urgent than your usual like marketing issue for sure. It's and I mean, again, that often happens too because it's having a proper process for pushing changes, right? And it's where people, I feel that over time as digital marketing gets more complex, back in the day you could copy a file and it would be fine and there wouldn't be any issues now, but now you have to do proper version control and pushing changes and marking off versions and forking changes. It's and having pull requests and everything else. And so it's definitely requires a level of work to have it done right that you didn't used to have to do, many years ago. So if you've been doing digital marketing for a long time, like I have, and you're like, what's the big deal? Like it's a big deal now. So it's, I've stopped myself from going into the actual theme files in WordPress and making changes, which, my developers just love it when I do that. But I did learn how to use Bitbucket to pull issues and make commits. So good job, me.
Nice. Round of applause for that. That's digging in deep.
Thank you.
There.
Very proud of actually not cowboy coding anymore. Thank you.
That's what that is. I don't think, like, what we were saying before we started recording, and there's that kind of like departmental, multidisciplinary, however we want to think about it, nature to how complex the internet, how complex websites are now, right? And again, I'm 7th year in SEO officially, eighth year, something like that. So a little bit behind you, but still a few years and a few horror stories under my belt at least. And I think we're having this conversation more and more. It was definitely the theme very much of pretty much all of last year, it felt like, on the podcast. It was, again, being aware of what's going on with the other teams, that communication, and having a little bit of knowledge of what is happening. Subscribe to a newsletter, listen to a podcast, or whatever it is that gets you news about the stuff that's happening. And this was a conversation I was having with Greg Finn from Marketing O'Clock and Cypress North as well. Like, I listen to Marketing O'Clock because it's a broader marketing podcast. It's not just SEO. They talk a lot about PPC. Most of the team there work on the PPC team. And I don't do PPC anymore. I haven't done for like 4 or 5 years. So me being kept up to date with that kind of stuff and knowing like, oh yeah, this is how PMAX is shifting to AI Max or whatever and that kind of thing, and how that stuff can literally affect the SERPs that you are supposedly trying to rank in and trying to understand. And then from an analytics point of view, as we were saying earlier, understanding where you're coming from both sides, and then also thinking about email marketing and all the other aspects of digital marketing, like you said, that have evolved over the last 2 decades or so. I think it's more complicated than ever.
Oh,
Would you
absolutely.
agree?
And I think, and this is not the end of it. Like, I think it's going to get more and more complex over time. We can't even picture, 20 years ago, did I know that this is where it was going? No, absolutely not. 20 years from now, who knows what's going. I mean, I'll probably be retired, but
Fingers crossed.
We'll see where the industry goes. Yeah, I mean, 20 years from now, I'll be 70. Hopefully, I'll be retired by then.
I think that there's a real kind of, I think there's a bit, we feel like there's a big shift happening, right? Again, the conversation that's happening all over the place. Everyone talking about AI search and the shift with ChatGPT search and Perplexity and Gemini's integration into everything. Have you seen that kind of affect how people are approaching the analytics side of things? Has that kind of scared people into thinking like, oh, I need to have some fancy AI integration into my analytics? Or do you still think it's a case of keep it simple until you need to kind of make that next step?
Yeah, I think certainly a lot of the questions I get are like how to track AI searches that end up on your website. And so I actually have 2 blog posts about this. I have one on how to set up a channel to track AI tool traffic from ChatGPT and Perplexity, et cetera, that does end up on your website. And then I have another post where if someone, for example, if you do a search and you get an AI overview, there's always those links on the side that you can click on and go to someone's website. And so if that link includes the decoration that highlights the text on your page, we can grab that and save that and then see how these people engage with your page. So those are 2 different posts we have on the website. We can put these in the show notes, links to those as well. They're just on kpplaybook.com. But so I think setting that up is just like a bare minimum table stakes. You have to do that right now kind of situation. And the one for the channel, you can do that in GA4 itself. The other one does require Google Tag Manager, but just a little bit. And I have a walkthrough, so it's not too scary, I promise. But I think being proactive about this and tracking this stuff now as it grows, I think is important. But I also think it's important to keep some perspective. Looking at your AI traffic, it's probably just a very small portion of the people coming to your website. I think the bigger conversation that's happening is the idea that, guess what? We're going back to brand building. So the idea that, people are going to see your brand multiple times coming up in AI reviews and featured snippets. They may never click through. And that's okay. They just get to know your brand over time. And then eventually when they are ready to purchase, they will Google your brand. And then you end up with a branded search. So one of the things as SEOs you should really be tracking, if you're not already, is that percentage of branded search. And don't discount that. Track the growth of that over time, because as the different features take away traffic in the sense that you don't necessarily get traffic from a non-branded search anymore. You're going to have people doing non-branded searches, not going on a website. And then when they're ready to buy, then they'll do a branded search and get to you at that point. And I think also coming from the local SEO background that I had when I did SEO, that doesn't bother me the way it bothers some other SEOs, because in local SEO, like, we lost our ability to push people to websites a long time ago, right? Like, Google's got their Google, what's it called now? Google Business Profiles. It used to be called Google My Business. It was called Google Places and Google Local and all the other names. I think it's had 7 or 8 names in my career. But it's always been a way for Google to show that information without people going to the website. And my philosophy has always been, I don't really care if people get on the website as long as they go and buy your stuff. So if somebody decides to just look up where you are and then drive to your store, great. I don't care. They went. If they, for example, and this is where, like, as a local merchant and you're not using, say, Google Merchant Center to be able to show that you have products in stock, you need to be doing that. Because again, if you think about somebody who's looking for something specific, they search for that product, a Google shopping carousel comes up, they see that it's at that store, they look at your store information. At no point have they actually been on your website. And then they get in the car, they go to your store, they buy the thing. 0 website visits, tons of engagement with your brand. And so I think that's where tracking things like Merchant Center impressions, branded impressions, like that is where the real search insights are going to come from in the future, not necessarily on-site traffic. Because the on-site traffic that you do get as well, especially in the UK and Europe, people are saying no to being tracked. You can't track them. It's such a funny, I published last week an article on how to see if consent signals were being received correctly by GA4. And I actually had a DM from someone that said, okay, but if they say no to tracking, how do I track them? Like, no, you can't. If they say no, you can't track them. And they're like, but, and then they said, oh, I really need to look it up because the quote was spectacular. It said, well, how can I implement a consent management solution that still tracks them if they say no? It's like, well, you could just implement it wrong. Like, that's it's
wrong on purpose.
I see that done wrong all the time. Probably not on purpose, but like, it's just so wild. It's like, well, I still want to track them, but you can't track them. So knowing that you can't track these people, and then the other people who have ad blockers just aren't even probably seeing your consent dialogue because it's never even triggering, which is fine because they don't show up in GA4. So the only people you are actually tracking are the people who say yes to being tracked. Or aren't using an ad blocker. And is that really good traffic? Probably not. So again, really thinking about, what are the different ways that I can engage with people in those off-site features? And then how can I track that? That becomes almost the more important part of analytics, not just the on-site behavior stuff. Like, track the heck out of people who do make it to your website, but don't discount the stuff that happens off the site as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think... you had a great conversation with Crystal Carter a few months ago talking about that, the nature of brand and how important it is to LLMs and the visibility. And I know Aleda Solis had a conversation with you recently as well about that. Like,
the year in our webinar, the theme is brand and AI and everything else. Actually, so we're recording this in mid-May. In late May, I'm talking about Will Reynolds about exactly the same thing, AI and offsite and what to consider for your brand. So this is what we're talking about this year.
Brand is the buzzword for this year, for sure. It has been pretty much the buzzword for all of Search with Candour this year. And I think it's going to be the thing that a lot of people are talking about. And like you said, when it comes to those off-page, off-site kind of things, I think a lot of people freak out, right? When you get those zero-click searches, when you're getting, like you said, oh, I can't track people. How come I can't track? And we'd gotten so used to and so happy with the amount of tracking, and I think it's definitely been kind of obviously a backlash from the corporation side of things, but and the legal side of things, but from a user perspective, talking to, for want of a better phrase, normies like my wife, for example.
Oh yeah, people who don't do what we do, who just use the internet in regular ways, like they don't want to go on websites.
Yep. I remember finding out that my wife denies all cookies and has done for her entire life, and I was like,
how dare you?
You
are the problem.
What about my attribution, Emma? Did you not think of that? How dare you? Like, and I had
Every
a whole
once in a
conversation
while,
of
if
like,
I'm going to buy something from an ad, I make sure to actually is my ad blocker disabled? Okay, now click on the ad. Now complete it in the same session. Oh, I just made a marketer's day.
Give you credit, really. Exactly.
But that's so rare. And yeah, I think that if you are in a situation, in-house or agency, it doesn't matter, and you've been reporting just on traffic and not all this other stuff, like, you got to change. You've got to change before you start losing your job, before you start losing your clients, because, this is really where the reporting is going to be, is looking at those offsite stuff, not just the onsite stuff.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, when it comes to those zero-click things, a lot of us are freaking out about that lack of attribution, right? That lack of click. And when it comes to how do you measure brand visibility and all that kind of stuff, it feels a very kind of nebulous kind of thing, right? And I think
we've gone full circle back to spray and pray from the Mad Men days.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
We had a lovely little golden age of all the data we could possibly want, and probably a lot of privacy violations and things, but no 100%.
longer. Yeah. Oh, the things we could track, we should not have been able to track. Like cookies should never have been used in the way that they were. But it's yeah. And the other thing too, like if you have a lot of people using your site with Safari, third-party cookies have been gone for a long time now. So don't get all worked up about Google's changes. Like that ship has sailed for you. So sorry.
And I do love the conspiracy theory thing of like, oh, my phone's listening to me. Look, this Facebook ad perfectly matched what we were talking about. It's like, yeah, because you've been giving it data for the last 15 years about everything you like and search for. You have been typing in all of your interests and all the liked pages and all the Instagram reels and the WhatsApp conversations. Like, it's all one big meta network, and people don't realize the data they're giving away on a daily 100%.
Basis. Yeah, and it's also at the same time, don't you want relevant ads? Like and this is where I think too, right? This is changing a little bit, where they're like, oh, especially on Instagram, for example. Like I just got a recommended account to me talking about the Professional Women's Hockey League. And the playoffs that they're in right now. Like, yeah, I don't follow this person. This is perfect, relevant content for me. I love women's sports. I especially love women's hockey. Of course, I'm Canadian. This is what I'm going to enjoy. And so, yes, thank you for that perfect recommendation. I would much rather have that than something that is totally not my interest at all. And so I think that that's where, as marketers, we're like, oh, I don't like that they're tracking me. But other people are like delighted that they get exactly what they would like to see show up in their feeds.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I think, like, I'm totally with you. Like, to contrast that, being a British guy who likes heavy metal, I get a bunch of bands recommended who I've never heard of before. I'm like, oh, I have no idea. They sound great. And I have bought albums and gone to gigs and literally handed the band members physical money because I found them on Instagram through an ad. And again, that whole attribution conversion journey is unmappable still,
right? But like how do you so they run ads on Instagram, you like their account, maybe you follow them, great, maybe you don't, maybe you just decide to go to a show, you don't buy the ticket through their website. So, or even if you did, you bought the ticket, you click on the link to buy the ticket, it takes you to Ticketmaster, for example. So then if they're not hooked into Ticketmaster, they wouldn't know where that purchase came from. You go to the store, you physically hand them money to buy merch. How is that attributed? No idea, right? It's just and you can drive yourself crazy trying to attribute that, or you could just accept that there are some things you cannot track. And that's why I think that this efficiency metric, which I think I talked about last year when I was on here, where you take all the inputs of, here's all my impressions, here's the money that I made, add those together, that's it. I think that is really the only true thing that you can track going forward, because impressions are going to be a metric you will always be able to get. I say that now, and next year we'll be talking about how impressions are gone now. Sorry. I'm just going to knock on wood.
Us now, Dana.
Yeah, I'm just going to knock on a little bit of wood here. But yeah, I think it's, thinking about impressions, and that's something we should always hopefully be able to track, and you'll be able to know how much money you make, period, right? And those are the two things that should always stay true in analytics. So and I think about impressions, it's in terms of like, that's a metric that's been around for a long time. Pre the internet, you would know how many cars were driving past that billboard. You would know the listenership of that radio station, number of subscribers to that newspaper, right? Like that's always a metric we've had access to. So I think impressions are here to stay. And of course you can track your money. I should hope so. So you'll always have that too. And so again, if more impressions, more money, yes, no, simple, easy metric for people to get their hands around is just like a starting point for deeper analysis.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's like you said, it almost feels like we're going, whilst we're going forwards, dragged kicking and screaming by various LLMs and things, we're also going backwards. And it's all kind of like, oh, it's the fundamentals of marketing that have been true for 300 years, basically. Like it feels like a weird dichotomy of the incredibly modern artificial intelligence has taken over the world, and also it's basically like advertising in newspapers again. You can't track anything, who cares? And I was having this conversation with the client the other day, funnily enough, a sponsor of the podcast and sponsor of our newsletter, and they were like, well, can we track clicks, or like how much money can we expect to make from sponsoring one episode of the podcast? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can tell you how many people clicked on that link if you give me a UTM that you then track. I don't have access to your analytics, so you tell me what page you want to send them to, right? And you work out your attribution. And they asking for like, can you get an idea of the amount of profit and revenue we can expect from 4 weeks for sponsorship? I'm like, also no. But that is not how advertising works. If you're advertising on Instagram or in a newspaper or in a billboard or a plane in the sky or whatever it is, it's impressions, right? That's always been the conversation. That's always been the number that people hang their hat on. And I know now there's a lot more transparency coming into the podcast side of things. Spotify are introducing public play numbers. I don't know if you heard this the other day.
I
Dana.
did, yes. I mean, that's always been podcast attribution and podcast analytics have always been a bit of a nightmare because there's so many different distribution channels. And it actually it plays into the larger issues that we're seeing in SEO as well, of this fracturing of channels where Google's always been the big player, but now people are going to private Slacks, private Discords, Reddit, listening to podcasts and then typing things into their URL. And so if we can get some more stats on podcasts, that'd be great. But again, like, I don't, basically you're buying good vibes is what you're buying when you sponsor a podcast, right? And so, and we should mention your sponsor. Who is the sponsor that you were talking about? Let's give them some good vibes right now.
Yeah, I love that kind of. I'm going to change my sponsor pitch now to it's all about good vibes. That is the angle I'm taking now.
Yeah, 100%.
If you want good vibes, sponsor Search with Candour.
And I think that's where it's and that's where you can really tell if you've got that audience fit, right? Is if you do sponsor a podcast, and this is where I know later on we're going to talk about the tool software that I use that I think deserves more attention, SparkToro. 100%. And I think probably if you know the industry, there is a lot of people who are aware of this tool already, but if you haven't checked out SparkToro, you can type in someone's job title and find out what kind of podcasts they might listen to. And Search with Candour comes up because one of our job titles that we target is online marketing manager, and guess what, your podcast comes up. So of course
there we go.
Something
Thanks,
where
mate.
100% I want to be on the podcast. Great. If we weren't on the podcast, would we sponsor the podcast? Possibly, right? But that's where that kind of research really comes in with regards to that audience. What are the things they're already paying attention to? Don't try to steal their attention, just build off the attention that podcast has already gotten with that audience.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more and more of that kind of cross-channel momentum, I guess I want to say, the age-old adage of the multiple touch points across. And I think again, I think I used this exact quote with you last year, and I think it was outdated then. You see a thing 9 times before you purchase from them or before you click on a thing.
Exactly.
I think it's way higher than that now. That is a very very outdated number
or something, but it
it's
is very high. Yeah. But again, 97% of all stats are made up, right? So we don't, so we don't actually know the real number. Maybe they just need to hear it once. Maybe they need to hear it 17 times. I don't think there's an exact rule of thumb, but certainly, if your audience is already at this place, why would you not spend that effort there? And again, if you've trained your clients to want that exact, of course they're going to come to you and say, well, what's my exact value I'm going to get out of this? Well, it's harder than that. And I actually talked to a group of CEOs last week about how I tried to be, nice, because, you don't want to get them too upset, but how their past behavior may have resulted in their teams being afraid to give them inaccurate results. And so maybe you need to have that kind of psychological safety with your team to allow them to say, look, we can't track this exactly, but this is what we think the value of this is going to be, and have that room for experimentation, which is also difficult because maybe we're going into recession, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, living in Canada, boy, things have been real weird for the past few months with Trump being like, we're going to make it the 51st state. We're deeply offended by that. Whenever anybody writes, by the way, about how Canada's upset and it's about the tariffs, it's not about the tariffs. It's about the Americans trying to make Canada part of America. We're not interested. Thank you so much. So that's what gets Canadians mad. The tariffs are like, yeah, whatever. The 51st state stuff, that's right out.
It takes a lot to rile you guys up, right? You're kind of like us, where you're polite to a fault, and then once you snap, that's when you know you've pissed off a Brit or a Canadian.
Yeah, I tell people Canadians have two phases. They have I'm sorry and you're sorry. And so that's what's happening right now. Is that Canada's in the you're sorry phase with America. Yeah.
Either way, they're sorry.
Yep. Someone's going to be sorry. We'll see who.
Exactly. That's the Canadian way of life. And I feel like there's definitely a kind of connection when it comes to, I know we're talking a big picture here, but that also applies to a lot of the stuff we talked about last time when it came to stuff I'd not really dug into in GA4, because I'd had a little poke around. I'm not a part of our analytics team, but I was more involved in the SEO team at the time. I'm now fairly far removed from that, but I still do client work now and then and still have a poke around. And like I said, I try to keep myself up to date. There was a conversation I had with the team when I moved into my marketing and partnerships manager role away from client work. I was like, I still want to get my hands dirty. I still want to keep up to date. I still want to know, so I can have conversations like this where I can say, I have experienced this on GA4. I saw this thing. I've broken that before as well. Like all that kind of stuff. I think still getting in the details and getting, boots on the ground and all that kind of stuff is such a big difference to a lot of the kind of theoretical stuff we talk about, right? Like you said, like, oh yeah, you can talk about tracking brand and all that kind of stuff you want, but you can actually track the stuff from AI overviews if you know what you're doing and if you follow the resources and stuff like that. I think a lot of us end up talking about those kind of nebulous concepts but not actually doing anything about it. So what I'm basically giving you a big compliment and saying I appreciate you actually you're putting action to words, right? And I think a lot of people talk about these things, and like I said, I'm as a person who basically talks professionally, I am very much guilty of that. But it's an important thing for people to understand, and as you said earlier, start tracking now so you can build and adapt and change with the times, rather than once it's more complicated a year from now or 18 months from now, whatever it is, and you realize you need to build 15 different custom reports to even make sense of anything. Because that was a huge takeaway from our conversation last time, was the power of custom reporting. And I know that has been basically a revelation for me in terms of making things digestible for clients. And again, like we said, breaking down those communication barriers between teams of like, hey, PPC team, here's all your stuff in one report. It's called Jim's. I think you used the example of like, here's Dave's report or something like that. And I was like, that is literally what I've done. My client is called David, and he's like, here's David's report. Like, if you want to go and poke around and do stuff, I recommend just go there as your first. Bookmark that report and go and check that out. And that actually,
I called it Mike's report. And Mike actually listens to the podcast. I got an email from him. He's like, am I the Mike? I'm like, yeah, you're the Mike. So
I'm the Mike. Like, yes.
Yeah, you're the Mike. Yeah. It's the other thing too is sometimes people like, I'll post these things on like how to track AI overviews in GA4, and they'll be like, oh, I don't have time to do this. Like, I did the step-by-step walkthrough. It took me 8 minutes. So take 8 minutes out of your day. And so one of the things I've really been recommending to people is something that I've done my entire career. When I got my very first real job after university, my very first boss handed me a notebook and said, every day write down everything you do and everything that you learn and put aside time to continue to learn. Like, thank you so much, Hugh. So I have done that ever since then for all these years later. That was in, 1997 was when I had that conversation. And here I am still doing it all these years later. And one of the things I do is I set 15 minutes aside for myself every single day to go through the things that I've bookmarked, because I use Pocket to keep track of articles I might want to read later, and just go through Pocket. And I have a notebook and I write notes down in it, because for me, if I write it down, I'll remember it. If I just read it and I don't write it down, I won't remember it later on. And that is what keeps me up in this industry. And sometimes I have to do a little bit more time. Like after I go on vacation, there always seems to be a GA4 update every time I go on vacation. So my next vacation is going to be the week of June 30th. I'm taking that week off. So look for some big GA4 changes then.
Put that in your calendars, folks.
Yeah. Because you know that GA4 also loves doing stuff on Canada Day, which is when all their other major changes have been pushed out, which is July 1st. So just keep that in mind. And Google Marketing Live is coming up later this month, and recording this in mid-May, so we'll see what comes out of that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll have another instance of everything changes between recording and publishing.
Exactly.
Day.
Okay. Yeah. This is my life. This is what happens.
Exactly. I know I think it happened a couple of Christmases in a row as well, wasn't it? I was like, there's no more updates for the year, says Gary and Martin and John. Everything's fine. By the way, it's Boxing Day. Ta-da! Like, back to work, everyone. Like,
I think it's that Americans need to take more holidays is really our takeaway here. Because you tell them about Boxing Day and they're like, what? Like, yeah, no one wants to go back to work after Christmas. Take another day. We have Boxing Day in Canada as well, but America does not celebrate that. They should really take more holidays. That's our big takeaway for you Americans.
There you go.
Get more holidays.
That's the one big takeaway.
Yeah.
I mentioned custom reports being a bit of a revelation for me. Is there anything in the last 13 months, the changes and evolutions that happened, that you think is something people are not using enough of in GA4, that are not paying enough attention to? Or is it taking a custom report and adapting? Is that still like I said, maybe that's just me going in with my very basic level of knowledge.
I'm definitely not seeing a lot of custom reports for sure. I would say, and explorations feels like the next natural step beyond custom reports. But I also think too, annotations just came out. And so people have not gone in and backfilled their annotations yet. I'm yet to see a property with annotations that isn't one that I've set up for someone. So please go back in and put in your annotations. And one of the things, and I actually have a post coming out that will be out by the time this podcast is recorded that will go through how to use annotations, and will also include a standard operating procedure template that you can copy and make, edit for your particular situation on how to use annotations. But there's color coding. They have date ranges now. You can put in a description, not just a title. There's all sorts of great changes for annotations. So one thing you can't do yet is import them, but there is an API for annotations, and I suspect there will be some changes coming where you'll be able to import them easily. I'm working on something where I don't have this published at all yet, but it's what I want to be able to do is be able to select something in Slack and have it an automation that would then send it off to as an annotation to GA4, for example. So, just to make it easier for people to make things become annotations, or Google Sheet or something like that. So I am working on stuff like that, but I think use annotations, go back and backfill them. And the other great thing with annotations is you can put them in the future as well. So I've already loaded all my speaking dates for this year into GA4 as annotations on our playbook property. So it's like, as soon as I'm booked to speak at something, put it in as an annotation, done. And then I don't need to think about it again. So you 100% want to start using annotations if you haven't already, because it is, 3 years from now, you're not going to remember that there was, one of our clients is in Australia. They had a cyclone that closed their business for 2 days. We should probably annotate that so that 3 years from now, you're not like, what happened? No one was leaving their house. So I think that's where it's really important to just annotate those sorts of things as you remember them. And then there is an export function from annotations, so you can go back later, because there's a limit of 1,000 annotations per property, which if you annotate a lot, you're going to run out of things real quick. But you can export, go through it, decide what you can delete, clean things up later. Just err on the side of annotating. You can always remove it later if it ends up being something you don't need to know.
Yeah, and it feels like the similar continuity you were saying with the notebook approach, right? Like,
yep.
I am exactly the same way. Maybe it's our ADHD brain coordination kind of thing of like,
yep.
Writing things down makes such a big difference, whether that is physically writing it down or typing it. I have a little physical to-do list. I have like a tiny little vertical portrait notebook type thing.
Here's my notebook every day. And
there you go.
There you go.
Mine's at my desk in the other room, but it is real, I promise. And that's that kind of thing of, at the end of the day, I go through and make sure I have ticked off all the things that I have done. And I have done the exact same thing with annotations, like going through Search Console or having those conversations with clients, again, tying this all into that client communication side of things, having the ability to say, oh yeah, the migration happened on the 8th of May. Like, well,
put it in
do you remember the date of a migration from a year ago when you're comparing year-on-year data? Like,
no,
probably not. No. So I totally agree with it. It's a brilliant piece of advice to err on the side of writing it down and not needing it than needing it and not writing it down and being like, when did we do that? Was that the 5th or the 6th? I'm like, what, the traffic changed? That really drops off in the 10th, so it's probably the 9th, I think. Does that matter? Oh god.
Well, and it's also for succession planning too. Like, you're not going to have your employees forever, and so if you annotate stuff, that stuff that's in somebody's head can be somewhere in a central database. And one of the first things that can happen when you onboard new staff is, here's our annotations, go through and read them. And that can really help catch someone up too on the major stuff you've been doing without having to find all the documentation that's on like someone's dusty laptop from 2018.
Yeah, that centralizing information is so important as well. Like, we have a system here that we've been building over the last few years, since I joined 4 years ago, like having a central client info sheet of like, every time you the account lead writes a report, the account manager has a call, or both, ideally, like, you make a note of what you talked about, what's changed, what the client is launching a new product range. You might not need to do anything for those pages. You might not need to do anything like actual work on that, but just the fact that it's there, because they might say, hey, do you remember when we launched that product range? Now we need to discuss how to properly write a product description. You're like, product range? What product range? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, that product range. Right. But centralized information, again, breaks down all those barriers. And I hadn't even thought about the onboarding side of things, mate. That is a brilliant way of thinking about it, because having that, like, kind of the source of truth, right? That initial kind of point of contact of spend half an hour digging through the client's GA4 annotations, read everything, take notes. Does it all make sense? If you have any questions, speak to the account lead, speak to the account manager, whoever it is, speak to the client even in some cases. And that can be such a big difference between I have been in this situation before, and I'm sure you have as well, being on a call 3 months later, 6 months later, and they ask, so how did that change go? Or how did this new piece of content? You're like,
what change? Yeah.
What change? Right. Yeah. The thing from July last year. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, of course. And I think it's that kind of, again, maybe we're coming back around to people being afraid of change and stuff as well. But taking the little bit of time each time to do that is going to save you that time in the long run. Right.
Oh, 100%. And especially this is extra important for agency people because you don't work with just one client at a time.
Yep.
You are going to forget things. This isn't just an ADHD thing, although there does need to be a wide overrepresentation of ADHD people in the agency world because we just are leaning on our strengths, I guess. But certainly, you're going to forget stuff, accept that you're going to forget things. It's not a personal failing. It's like your brain was not built to remember all these things. That's not how this works. So just document it. It takes 4 seconds. You will always have time to do this. And so one of the things that I have to remind myself all this time is like, just do the thing now. Just do the thing now. Yep. And if you're physically in a place where you can't, then have a trusted system. And this is from a book that I read many years ago that helped me put together my current to-do system, which is Getting Things Done and it's well worth the read if you haven't read it. It's a little bit outdated now because it does focus a lot on like paper systems, doesn't talk a lot about technology, but the principle is there of like, if it takes less than 2 minutes, just do it. Just get it done, get it out of the way, and then move on with your life.
Yeah, I saw one recently that was, I can't remember where I saw it. No, it was probably an Instagram reel or a TikTok or something, was people putting a finger up. So if you have something to do, say, I need to go and empty the dishwasher.
Yeah.
But in classic ADHD fashion, that is 3 rooms away, which gives you about 1,000 different things to get distracted by. Like, but the carpet needs a hoover and the cat litter needs changing. And they're between you and the dishwasher. But having a physical thing, like literally have write it on a Post-it note. Again, with my little to-do list thing, it has tiny little like, I guess they're annotations, tiny little 2 centimeter by 5 centimeter kind of things. And I would just write one word of like dishwasher or GA4 or whatever it is. And just be like, right, stick that on the monitor, on my forehead, whatever it needs to do. And people started using the finger technique of like, that tells you're in the middle of doing something, don't get distracted. And having that physical thing literally in front of you being like, oh yeah, why is my finger up? Oh yeah, of course. And I know some people use the Sims analogy, right? Of like, sometimes I feel like somebody else is playing The Sims and they just left me in another room and like, why am I in the
And now
kitchen?
I'm going to set something on fire because I don't know what to do. Yeah,
exactly.
As someone who's played The Sims in the past,
pool.
like, my God, I couldn't play that game. So I'm like, they're the worst. They're unmanageable. I could not play that. But yeah, the other thing too, and this is actually, there's a technique that's like used in safety in Japan, of the idea of when you do something, you point at it and repeat the thing that you just did. And so I do this all the time for things like you lock the car because you beep the car. There's no, this is me showing my age. You don't physically turn the key anymore. So it's hard to remember if you locked the car. And so sometimes I'll just point to the car and say, you locked the car. And if it's busy, I might look a little crazy. I don't care. But now I remember that I locked the car. So I'm not, halfway into the airport thinking, did I lock the car? And then I have to walk all the way back out again to the massive parking lot to find my car, beep it again, walk back in again. So just doing those sorts of things can really help as a physical reminder of like, did you do the thing? And this is where I really, I didn't use SOPs and task lists and checklists and everything like that because I'm like, I'll remember, but like just have a checklist because sometimes you'll forget and sometimes you'll be in a rush and you'll be like, I don't need to go through all these things, but something like, oh, this will take 2 seconds. I'll just go ahead and do this. Like just do the thing. So that's been my motto for this year is just do the thing. So far, so good.
Yeah. I used this, and my wife and I started using a technique where we film ourselves locking the things and turning off the oven before we leave for an extended period of time. We literally record a video on your phone of like, here is the back door, click, locked, look, it doesn't open. Look, oven, all switched off. Those plugs and sockets all switched off. Guarantee 100%. So whenever you think, did I do that? It's like, hold on, let me just scroll back. Oh, yeah, we did lock that. Yeah, don't worry, don't worry. Like, and there's that real kind of, I don't know, like that weight off your shoulder, right? Because that anxiety, I've been on a holiday before and then realized like, did I do that? Like 3 days into the holiday, oh no, Now that's just going to eat away at me the whole time.
Yes, luckily our in-laws are nice and close, so we can be like, can you just go to the
Okay,
house and
there
make
you
sure
go.
we did the thing? Yeah. So that part's convenient if you do live close to family. But yeah, I do definitely when I lock the door, I'll point at it, be like, you lock the door, you know, because it's the pointing and talking to myself thing is 100% something that I use all the time to remind myself that I did actually do the thing that I was supposed to do. It's the stupid little things that you have to do to just keep reminding myself and then again, like that idea of losing mental weight because you know it's taken care of can really help with just like having a good brain space in your life. Which is a bit off topic of what we're talking about, but in general, like this is when people say to me, well, how do you get so much stuff done? Well, the first thing is medication. The second thing is like trying to keep that mental clarity. So having a system that I trust, that I write everything in on. And sometimes like I get caught up on stuff and I get behind and it's, you know, then the systems start to fall apart. You got to build it back up again. It's not going to be perfect all the time, and that's okay. We're not robots, we're humans. We use the robots for things. We ourselves are not robots. And just, be gentle with yourself if you do fall back behind on those things. It's not, you know, no one's perfect. You're just all doing our best.
Let's steer it back towards GA4. And
yes,
you mentioned the quadruple implementation earlier as one of the worst ones. Mm-hmm. Do you have any more absolute dumpster fires that are up there with a quadruple implementation that you want to share?
Oh,
the official
100%.
Dumpster fire report.
Yeah, I the two that I've recently audited, I think, are kind of tied for like worst implementation. I think one of the ones that is probably one of the worst implementations ever was just where that probably that 25% of revenue was attributed to the developers, and they were like, this is fine. And then another one that I'm dealing with right now, and this is actually quite a frustrating situation where I can see that the consent implementation is set up incorrectly. What's happening is when you go on the website, it is saying that you are you have consent granted, even if you haven't granted it yet. And then if you say no, then it changes it to no. And so I was like, no, that's not right. You can't do it like that. And they're like, oh, it's fine. This is the actual, like, and this is a very large organization, and this is their main consent person. And he's like, oh, it's fine. I'm like, it's not fine. And so I've gotten to the point where the client where I'm like, look, I have done everything I can. This guy does not believe me. Like, I think you're going to get fined. So when you do, then you can blame him, because we've well documented it through emails. This is all through emails too. He hasn't even gotten on a call with me. Yeah. And so it's just like, I don't know what else to tell you. And that's, I think, the most kind of frustrating situation when you know something is wrong and you know how to fix it. And I've even told them how to fix it. And then he comes back with things like, well, Google's documentation says you don't have to have an update state when somebody makes a consent choice, because there's two parts of the consent. There's the initial setting of, like, for example, if you're in EEA, the European Economic Area, you say no to everything, and then you make a choice, and then you have the update state. And Google's documentation says, and it's true, that you don't have to have an update state. But, like, you kind of do, because you should have an update state. And so it's and so he's like, well, Google says this. Like, yeah, Google says a lot of things. Like, Google says just have great content. I think that you really need to have an update state. And so he fights me on that, and then finally introduces an update state. But the update state is wrong. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe we have to go back to this again. So those kinds of things I think are the most frustrating, because it's like the answer is right there, and you're being held back from implementing it. And those are the kinds of things I think are the most frustrating. Another really bad implementation that I'm working with right now is someone who had multiple subdomains for their different types of products, which makes sense based on their different technologies that they use. I don't want to give away what kind of company it is, but like having different subdomains for different technologies, 100% infrastructure-wise, makes sense. The problem is that they have a different GA4 for every subdomain, and they have cross-domain tracking set up in every GA4. So when you go from one subdomain to the other, which users do, there's link decoration saying that you're going from one domain to another domain. But because they're separate GA4s, it's completely, the attribution is lost. So what ends up happening is all their traffic is showing up as direct when you go from one website to another website in their same network, because they're using cross-domain tracking. So basically they'll have all the subdomains as tracked by that GA4, but all the subdomains are not tracked by that GA4. So Google thinks it has to add link decoration, and then it just doesn't know what the attribution is when you get there. It just completely wipes it out because that link decoration is going to override anything that you have set in GA4 with regards to source, medium, etc. So they end up with all this direct traffic. And so, I mean, that's a relatively easy fix. We just fix the cross-domain settings. Bob's your uncle, right? We have a great day. But I think that's where it's like a simple fix that is causing massive disruptions. I don't always get that lucky. Sometimes, you end up arguing with the consent guy for literally months about getting something fixed. But that's one of the worst ones I've seen. And it's just like, it's not anything that someone did maliciously. They just didn't understand that they don't need to set it up like that because, again, the documentation is not clear. So I think a lot of the times when I see stuff where people are just so frustrated, they're like, this is broken. I don't know why. GA4 sucks. And it's like, well, GA4 is not great. Like, it doesn't necessarily... I posted on LinkedIn because people ask me all the time, like, do you like GA4? And I posted the gif of the kombucha woman who's like, maybe, yeah, no. Oh, well, I guess. It's like, that's how I feel about GA4 sometimes. It's only as good as the data you give it. And it isn't smart enough to tell you when you've made mistakes. So that's where it's like, it's so easy to make those kinds of mistakes. And I think that there needs to be more education about GA4, which is why I have these courses that I've put together, which is why I talk about GA4 all the time. I think that the GA4 team doesn't necessarily have a lot of time to put together this documentation. And also they can't necessarily recommend specific things in certain ways because, Google's in this catch-22. They make a recommendation, everybody follows it. If it's not perfect for their situation, Google gets blamed, right? So again, this is where I always have a lot of caveats and stuff. Right? Like, if you do this is what I would recommend that you do. If you do this is what I recommend you do. And that's why, in addition to the courses, we have the community so that people can ask me questions. And that's where I get really interesting things that often turn into blog posts because of these unique situations of things like, my boss asked me how to track this. How do I do that? That's great. I love that question. I will help you do this, and then I will write it in a blog post about it. So, yeah.
Nice. I know you already mentioned annotations as something everybody should start doing.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd recommend as the quick little actionable thing that all the viewers and listeners should be doing right now?
Yeah, if you haven't set up your BigQuery export from GA4, just set it up. Even if you think, I don't know BigQuery, I'm never going to use it. It doesn't backdate from when you set it up. So just set it up, and 3 years from now, if you need it, great. Past you, very smart person who set up the BigQuery export, just go ahead and do it. Even if you're not using it right away, just set it up. It takes, I would say it's about a 15-minute thing. It is a little bit confusing, especially if you haven't used Google Cloud before. One thing you absolutely must do is make sure to attach a billing account to your, wherever the BigQuery is property that you set up. And Google Cloud has like the worst UI in the world. You think the GA4 interface is bad? Let me tell you, Google Cloud's like, hold my beer. So just make sure you do have a billing account attached to the project where you do export the BigQuery data to, or else you will run out of space eventually. That's a really important thing to check.
I had that exact thing happen with the client a couple of years ago. It's like the exact same thing. I was like, it just kind of stopped in August. And I'm like, yeah. Well, I mean, like, you hit the limit on the amount of...
And it's not going to cost a lot of money. Like, we're talking like pennies. It's not expensive, but you just need to set it up.
Exactly. And you teased it earlier. Give me a little bit more details about why SparkToro is the recommended tool and software you think more people should be using.
Oh, yeah. So they just did a major update, which I haven't even explored in total yet. But
yes, I saw Rand's post about this.
Yeah. So the idea that you can put in, so for example, if you post a lot on LinkedIn, as I do, LinkedIn on your analytics will tell you the job titles of people who frequently engage with your content. Grab those job titles, toss them into SparkToro, find out all the other places those people are hanging out. And now you basically have your content marketing strategy right there of, here's all the different sites that they pay attention to, here's all the different podcasts they pay attention to, here's all the different accounts that they follow, and now your job is to get yourself mentioned by those accounts on those podcasts, listed on those sites, sponsor a newsletter, sponsor a podcast, right? And I think that's really where, and they have this whole section called hidden gems, which are like less popular podcasts or websites or whatever, but still are being engaged with by this audience. So that could be more accessible places if you're just getting started with advertising. You don't want to spend, $20,000 for a very fancy podcast. You just want to start somewhere small. That's where you could definitely do that.
We're a lot cheaper than $20K, by the way, for the record, if any sponsors are out there.
Yeah, but if you want to reach that audience, like this is the way to do it. And because it's also less obtrusive than advertising, people are seeking this out already. They are making the choice to engage with this. So they're already interested. You're not interrupting them in the way that advertising does.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the marketing fundamentals and like, be aware who your audience are, and like exactly like you said, people freak out about that personalization side of things, even though you know
they do
really
like it.
it's often a
I
positive
only think
thing.
it's actually advertisers who freak out about it, and people who know like a little bit about advertising. So when I teach analytics at the University of Alberta, the first week is the second week, pardon me, is them using tools like Omnibug to see what kind of tracking happens when they go on websites, and they're routinely horrified. But like, this is all the stuff that happens behind the scenes that makes the internet what it is, and this is how remarketing works. And you know, like, what's the best trick in PPC? Add something to your cart, don't buy it, wait a week, see if you get an ad, right? Like, it's just this is save yourself some money. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that we learn as not normal people anymore, but normal people are like, oh, look at this fun thing ad recommended to me, I'm going to follow this account. They appreciate it. So really just lean into that.
Absolutely. And to finish this off, one fun thing to recommend. Doesn't have to be analytics or SEO or anything like that.
Oh, thank goodness.
A book, a video, a podcast, a film,
Yes.
whatever it is. What you've been enjoying recently?
I have been playing World of Warcraft again. I used to play for many years, yes. And so I've been playing Season of Discovery, which is like classic, but more. So if you used to play Warcraft forever ago, check out Season of Discovery. It's super fun. And if you want to play, I'm in a fun alliance, just let me know. And then the other thing I've been reading, I love murder mysteries, but I never actually read the Alphabet series, which features Detective Kinsey Milhone, which was published in the 80s. And I'm all the way through M now. It goes all the way to, I think, Y. She passed away before she could finish the series by Sue Grafton. But what I'm really enjoying about it is it's before cell phones and before the internet. And it is just delightful how you used to solve cases back in the good old days when you had to actually like answer the phone and like go visit people and call them and look at things in the phone book, which of course, you know, I remember being an old person, but if you are a young person, it is really fun to see the slice of life in like Southern California in the 80s and solving crimes, and the heroine is fantastic, and each one is a super quick read. Like I usually rip through them all in like a few hours. So if you're looking for some fast fun reads and they're all very self-contained, I recommend the Alphabet series by Sue Grafton.
Nice. I think that happens a lot with the crime genre and the horror genre as well, of like, you're kind of ruined if you suddenly introduce smartphones. Like,
right?
Could you just look this up in 10 seconds? Like, yeah, kind of.
I used to work at a video rental store in the 90s, and the amount of phone calls we would get from people who are wanting to solve bets by like, was this person in this movie? And we actually had, in addition to like knowing a lot about movies, we actually had a giant book of it was like IMDb, but in print form. I think that book actually became IMDb. And so we would have to look things up and be like, yes, so-and-so was in this movie. And you could hear in the background, like, you owe me $20. Like, it's just, but yeah, it was super fun working at a video store because of those kinds of things that, and now you could just Google it. But back then you could not. And so we were the IMDb for everybody.
Nice. Again, I remember having to go to a library and stuff, and always having that. My mum has always been the, what's that guy from person as we're watching something. And now I do a film podcast, I'm like, I'm also that guy, but for better and for worse a lot of the time.
Yep. Yeah, and I think on Amazon, when you pause it, it tells you the people who are on the screen.
Yes,
which is crazy.
X-Ray is on Prime. Yeah. They have a like, you may recognize this thing, or turns out this scene had to be filmed 6 times because Jack broke his leg halfway through and they had to stop filming for 8 months. You're like, cool, okay.
Yeah, I don't have that encyclopedic knowledge anymore. It's just of RuPaul's Drag Race contestants. That's my encyclopedic knowledge now. So
I actually have a couple of crime and mystery series recommendations for you that my wife's been reading recently. I don't know if are you familiar with the Scottish author Val McDermid at all?
I've heard of it's been on my like list to read list on Goodreads, but I have not started it yet. Okay.
That is what's the series called? It was turned into a TV show that was called Wire in the Blood, which I have seen some of. But yeah, the Dr. Tony Hill, the psychologist series that Val McDermid did. It's like my mum's absolute favorite series, and she got my wife into it as well. And also the Shard Lake series by CJ Sampson.
Okay,
You
I
heard of
don't
that?
know that one. No.
They're
All right.
historical mystery stuff, like
Perfect.
set in the like Tudor England,
Yep.
Henry VIII crime
Perfect.
stuff.
Right up my
And
alley. Love it. Yep.
I want to say it's the 6th or 7th book, the final one that came out in 2018, is
Okay.
called Tombland, and that is the part of Norwich that is about half a mile that way. And
Oh,
it is
fun.
set in Tudor
Yep.
Norwich, where I was born, where I worked in one of the buildings it talks about. I worked in one of those buildings for like 6 years, and I'm now about a 5-10 minute walk away from there. So highly
Yeah, and
recommend if you want some
meanwhile, where
weird
I live in
historical British
Canada,
stuff.
we have a pub that was built in 1897. They're like, it's the oldest pub on the island. Like, yep, that's great. We're so fresh.
I was talking to my friend from Toronto about that the other day. He visited us when he came to our wedding a few years ago, and he was just like, everything is so old. I'm like, yeah, that the tiny little I guess tiny little cottage that I grew up in, that my parents still live in now, has like a keystone that says like 1549.
That's insane.
And he was like, right, but that's just a thing. I'm like, no. It's signed by the guy that built the house. It doesn't have foundations. This is the house I grew up in. It's 500 years old.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how is it still standing? Or like, maybe it'll be standing forever. Who knows? Welcome to England.
Yeah, that part is great. Yeah, I mean, I live in a very new part of Canada, being out west on Vancouver Island. So the pub near us being that old is actually kind of a big deal out here. But we also have Canada's oldest Chinatown. If you ever go to visit
nice.
Victoria, yeah, it is beautiful. People should come visit. Come visit us in Canada. We could use the business. Thank you.
I've been meaning to visit. Like I said, I've got a couple of friends out there.
Now's the time.
I've been meaning to visit for a while. So yeah, I will make the trip one day. But if people want to make the trip to, I don't know, follow you, Dana, follow what you're doing at KP Playbook, how can they follow you? Where are the best places to find you?
LinkedIn is the best place to follow me. That's where I'm most active. We have LinkedIn live webinars once a month. So this podcast will be out, I think, after that happens. We'll be with Roll Reynolds. And then in June, hopefully, I'm trying really hard to get somebody from Google, from the GA4 team, to come on and have a webinar with me. So we'll see if that happens in June. We'll find out. But yeah, that's where I post everything. And I also have a newsletter there as well as on kpplaybook.com/newsletter. We have our bi-weekly newsletter there. And we also have all of our courses and resources and everything else. But LinkedIn is really probably the best place to follow me.
Awesome. I'll put links for everything we talked about, whether that's
and if
tools,
you Google
books,
Dana DiTomaso and any weird spelling thereof, Google will figure it out. It knows who I am by now, so it'll point you in the right direction.
Now that's how you know you've got your SEO sorted out, right?
Well, there's also only 2 Dana DiTomasos, and the other one lives in Colorado, and she's a high school principal, so Google can tell us apart. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm before I got married, I was Jack Chambers, which is very boring.
Generic. Yes.
And very middle of the road. And there are a lot of other more famous Jack Chambers. Now I'm double barreled. I'm unique, baby. That's how you sort your SEO out. Double barrel your name, change your surname, something weird.
Yeah, I didn't have to, but thank goodness, because my wife's last name is also a bit long, and it would be, if it was DiTomaso Dryberg, that would be a bit much.
Like
so.
Full.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think us keeping our last names was the best call.
Stick with that, mate. Stick with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure to nerd out about analytics, WoW, and crime novels and everything in between, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to catch up with you again. Like I said, I think we should make this a regular feature of
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dana's Dumpster Fire Report 2026 coming soon.
Perfect.
Amazing. Thanks, Dana. I'm sure we'll catch up soon. And good luck fixing all the horrible GA4 implementations.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to need it. Thank you.
And that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening all the way to the end. You're my favorites, you are. I really appreciate you doing that. And it makes a big difference, you know. I know we say this a lot, and I know I say like and subscribe and comment and all the usual YouTube and podcasty kind of stuff at the beginning of the episode. But if you stay right until the end, that's really, really good for us. That promotes how engaging and how interesting the content is, because I think the interviews and the guests kind of speak for themselves, right? I think they're an amazing group of guests, an amazing list, an amazing cast of people I have on the show. And if you're staying until the end and you're enjoying the show, please do let me know. Like I said, message us on social media, leave a comment on Spotify, all that kind of stuff. And I hugely, hugely appreciate everything you're doing to support the show. I've got some very cool partnerships and sponsorships coming up over the next few months as well. In July, we'll have a very, very cool partner we're working with who I've followed for a very, very long time. And I'm even talking with a couple of tools that I use personally who contacted me to sponsor the show. And it's all very SEO relevant. It'll be hugely relevant to your interests and everything you're doing in your job if you're listening and watching this podcast. So stay tuned for some awesome partnerships, some more fantastic guests coming up in the next few weeks as well. And yeah, I will be back, of course, next week as usual. Mark and I will be back in the studio in the next couple of weeks as well. And I'll have some more members of the Candour team joining me. I've already been talking to Tabby, our head of search, who's going to talk about unlinked mentions, basically brand mentions, and how they have shifted over the years, the importance of them, how that ties into LLMs, all this very cool stuff. I'm going to talk with our director of strategy, Jessica, as well. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation about client communication and client management. And I'm even talking to some of our content and SEO team about some specific topics as well. So stay tuned for more in-studio footage, not me in my spare room here like I am now. And stay tuned for more fantastic guests coming up over the next few weeks throughout the year. And like I said at the very top of the show, if you haven't already, check out Brighton SEO. I'll be speaking there in October. And if you can, please donate to my Just Giving page, because I'm going to be in an MMA fight later this year and it's kind of terrifying. So yeah, I hugely appreciate all of your support and thank you so much for watching or listening. I will see you next week.